Okay, so I'm gonna start moving through the presentation. Real quick, I'm gonna leave this descriptor, this written descriptor for Hunter to go into more detail on. But basically it is letting us know that what Fire Safe Sonoma is doing and the funding for what Fire Safe Sonoma is doing with this webinar is funded through a grant that Sonoma County Transportation and Public Works got to do some fuels reduction work out in West County. Hunter will tell you all about that. Our collaborators with this project are California Climate Investments, CAL FIRE, Transportation and Public Works, of course, Sonoma County Fire Prevention Officers Association, Fire Chiefs Association, and Sonoma County Fire Division under Permit Sonoma. Need to change that logo, I think. So once again, I'm Roberta McIntyre with Fire Safe Sonoma, and Hunter McLaughlin is here with us as well. The purpose of this is to describe the TPW project. Hunter's going to do that part, and then I'll talk about what the problem is, when you need to be prepared, what the risks, where the risks are, how to reduce those risks, and I want to explain for you in the end why this is important, and hopefully to most of us, if not all of us, that'll feel like an ask on our part, asking you to do some defensible space work on your properties. So I'm going to hand this off to Hunter now to do the first little bit, and then he's going to give it back to me in a few slides. So Hunter, take it away.
Okay. So Transportation and Public Works for Sonoma County was awarded this grant project, and the funding comes from cap and trade through CAL FIRE. So we can move to the next slide, please. So the project is over a 3.5-year period, and it will end in March of 2022. The total amount that was awarded to Transportation Public Works was a little over $1 million, and the county has a match of about $150,000, which is for a chipper and a truck, and some fuel and maintenance to do the chipper portion of the project. Move to the next slide. So we're going to do, with this project, some fuels removal along roads and some vegetation removal to help with the egress, ingress of firefighters during a fire. And so the project also includes a chipper program and you can move to the next slide, please.
Hang on one second. I want to make sure. Can you guys actually see the slides?
Yes.
Okay. Somebody mentioned that they couldn't.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So I'm going to just keep going then. So next slide will be, okay.
So we're focusing on evacuation routes throughout Northwest County. And so we did a preview, like a survey of the roads in the project area, and some roads were selected, and we're going to treat 30 miles of road. So if we go to the next slide. Project areas. This shows the project area for it in Cazadero, Timber Cove, Monterey, Rio Neto, Guerneville, and then the project area was expanded to include Occidental and Camp Meeker. And so those areas, you can have the chipper program and the home inspections, which is another part of the program. We could move to the next slide. So the fuels reduction is going to happen along the roads, and it's going to be about 15 feet on either side of the roads along the selected segments. And it is to prevent like roadside fire starts, and to, if it happens to be burning, it will be further away from cars, so it will make it easier for them to get in or out during an emergency. And also, we're going to be removing dead, dying, and hazardous trees along those sections, so that they're less likely to fall in storm events or fires that would be preventing ingress or egress to those areas. There's also the chipper part of the project. So anybody within the project areas can submit a request to Fire Safe Sonoma for some free chipping services. So you just have a pile on your property and they will come and chip for free if you live within the project area. And you should receive a brochure about that. You should have received it, and you may receive another one coming up about these services. And you can always contact Roberta or Fire Safe Sonoma regarding these services. If we could move to the next slide. So we are partnering with Fire Prevention, part of Permit Sonoma, who has the chipper crews, and so they will be doing the chipping for this project along the roads, as well as for the free chipper services for residents within the areas. And if we could move to the next slide. And Fire Safe Sonoma, we have partnered with them to provide these educational webinars or meetings before COVID. And so they've been really great to provide the defensible space trainings that have been very helpful. I learned a lot from them, so I hope that everybody can learn a lot from them as well. And they've been great with this. We move to the next part. So everybody, basically everybody has to work together. So the county and residents, we're trying to get everybody to work together to find out a way that we can work together to reduce the risk. Every little thing that we do can help reduce the risk, which every little bit counts. So if we could move to the next slide. And so Fire Safe Sonoma has been going to different events and tabling to help share the word. And it's just been a great experience so far. So we can move to the next slide.
All right. Do you want me to pick it up from here, Hunter?
Yeah, so I'll hand it back over to Roberta. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to email Roberta, and she's welcome to share my email as well for any questions you might have about the grant project. So,
all right.
Over to you, Roberta.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Hunter. Thanks so much.
Okay.
And once again, I didn't mention it earlier. It looks like we have 30 people in the room now. Thank you guys all for coming to the presentation. And yeah, if you have any questions about the funding or the scope of work beyond Fire Safe Sonoma's involvement in the project is, just let us know and we'll try to answer your question. And Hunter can't stay with us, so if you have any questions specific for transportation and public works, feel free to shoot them my way, and I can, if I can't answer them on Hunter's behalf, I'll certainly forward them to Hunter to take, to respond. So thanks very much.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Hunter.
Bye.
Okay, so let's get into our presentation. So I'm gonna do kind of like a what, when, where, how, and why format with this. And first of all is the what. What is it in terms of defensible space and wildland fire safety? What is it that we're really worried about? Well, I have a thought about that. I call it the red. The red will come and get you, in terms of a wildland fire. And if you're not prepared for it, you're gonna suffer dearly. If you reduce your risk, you're not gonna suffer as much, but we'll probably all suffer with the next fire in some way, shape, or form. It's just what it is. The idea is to reduce our risk and increase our survivability. And when I say the red, what I'm talking about is R is for radiant heat that will get your building, your property, your area. Embers is the E in the red, and the embers I think are probably the worst. They can be as small as a grain of rice or a little pea from a beanbag chair, and those insidious embers can get anywhere, and if they get into a little nook or cranny on a tree, in mulch, under your house, in your attic, wherever, if it gets in there, lands, and you get enough wind on that ember, it's gonna start smoldering and burst into a flame, and then you get the direct flame contact burning down your house. And then of course the D is direct flame when you have vegetation and combustibles next to your house. When you have those combustibles right next to your house, the direct flame can certainly involve your home itself. So that's the red. So that's really all I have to say about the what are we worried about. I think we've seen enough fire in our county to know that these are serious issues. So the question now is when? When should you do something about this? Last week, the week before, next week, next month, next fire season, if there is a fire season. Well, I tell you what, this is not the time to be thinking about it when you've got the evacuation order and you've packed up your things, whatever you've thought to grab, and you're stuck in traffic trying to get out of town, like a lot of people did in Coffee Park during the firestorms. And certainly this is not the time to start thinking about it after the fact. The time to start thinking about it is right now. So I'm going to try to show you this little ad I found that I think is pretty fun.
I got it!
Hi.
Can you help me?
I got it.
Thank you.
No problem.
Just like the rules to surviving Zombieland, there are steps you can take to be prepared for an emergency.
It's the right thing to do.
Talk with your family to make a plan. Look for safe areas to meet up if separated. And stock up on supplies. It's never too early to get prepared, so start now.
Right now? Right now.
You can't predict emergencies, but you can be ready.
You're welcome, America.
Visit ready.gov today to learn more.
So, at the front edge of the COVID pandemic, I was talking to one of my daughters about TV shows to watch while we're sheltering in place. And she says to me, "Hey, have you ever watched The Walking Dead?" And I'm like, "No." So she asked, she suggested I watch it. So I started watching The Walking Dead, and I'll tell you, I kind of got hooked on it, but it's not the best series to be watching during the COVID pandemic. Not the most brilliant thing I've ever done. But anyway, the time to be ready is when you should start doing something to reduce your risk is now, and I'm going to go a little bit outside the scope of defensible space right now, but have your go bag ready. Take a look at our Ready, Set, Go program. It's got a lot of good information in there to help you figure out how to get ready to evacuate. I think it's really important this day and age that we all start to get comfortable with evacuating, at least as much as possible. So then, where are these areas at risk that Roberta's talking about? Well, let's take a look. We'll take a macro view, and then we'll take a more micro view. So at a macro view, we can look at the FRAP maps that show fire hazard zones, communities at risk, fire history, etc. Let's take a little bit closer look at the fire hazard zone map here. So I call these colors lemonade, orange juice, and tomato juice, and water. If you live in the area that's clear, that's white, your degree of risk is pretty small. If you live in the lemonade area, your degree of risk is higher. If you live in the orange juice area, your risk is even higher yet. And if you're living out there in tomato juice land, you're at the super high risk for fire. So if you live in those areas, the closer you are to living in that tomato juice area, I think the more at risk you are, and thus really the more you really need to be focusing on reducing your risk. That's not to say that if you live in the orange juice or lemonade area, you forget about it, but it just becomes super important if you live in that tomato juice area. So let's take a little bit more of a look at a more micro view and start talking about the defensible space, the meat and potatoes of this presentation. Defensible space is defined by regulation, is the area that's a minimum of 100 feet from your home. And that's what we're going to talk about here. We're going to try to give you some ideas in terms of how you can reduce the risk in that area. In terms of the defensible space per se, there's a lot of different publications out there and schools of thought in terms of how to subdivide that 100 feet and beyond and what to call those areas. There's zone 1, zone 2, zone 3. There's the home ignition zone. There's all kinds of stuff, the lean and green zone. Doesn't matter what you call it. The area within 5 to 10 feet of your home, I call the home ignition zone, or will call it the home ignition zone for the purposes of this presentation. There's legislation in the works, I think, to start to make it a requirement that that 5-foot no home ignition zone or ignition free zone, whatever you want to call it, be completely non-combustible in terms of your structure. I'm not sure, don't know the language of that or exactly what it says, but there's legislation around the corner to require more in terms of risk reduction in that area as a legal requirement. Regardless, fire doesn't care if it's legal or not. So within that first 5 to 10 feet, I call that the home ignition zone. Beyond that, I call the defensible space zone out to your 100 feet. And then beyond that, I call that the wildland reduction zone. So those are the terms I use for this conversation. And once again, the home ignition zone is the area closest to your structure and probably is what I say the most at risk. And I say probably just as a disclaimer, you know, in reality, it likely is. So let's take a look at this video that was done by an insurance organization. And I'm going to point to a couple of things as we watch this. This is a 20-mile-an-hour wind and a escalating and it shows where fires taking hold over the place. There were some things in the gutters there. There were things in the corners where wind eddies can develop and keep fire nice and intense there. You know, embers landing on the roof, stuff like that. Once again, that's all what I consider part of the home ignition zone, even though it's on the building itself. So rain gutters, part of the home ignition zone. Combustible mulch and vegetation. There was a little bit of that going on in that video. You know, if you've got combustible mulch and combustible vegetation within the 5 to 10 feet of your home, your risk is going to be higher. I myself am replacing combustible mulch around my house with pea gravel, non-combustible mulch. And if you've got dry leaves that tend to stack up against your home's perimeter, make sure that those are raked away. Especially if you get that red flag warning, run out there and make sure that you rake that stuff away if it's built up. You know, it might take you 15, 20 minutes, you know, but drag that stuff away when we get that red flag warning. Get that. You know, the idea also between this home ignition zone is if you get that red flag warning, run around your house and make sure those combustibles aren't there. If you got wooden furniture, if you have combustible cushions on your lawn chairs, etc., take those in the house, get those off of there. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The edge of the roof and fascia are at risk to direct flame contact. What happens if you've got gutters filled with leaves and combustible pine needles, etc., and a fire gets in there? I don't care how good your roof is, the edge of that plywood, where the shingles land on that plywood and you have the intersection of all that with your rain gutter, it's vulnerable if you've got a little campfire built right underneath there in that rain gutter. It's eventually going to take hold, grab hold of that plywood and start taking off your roof. The thing to keep in mind too, as you're looking at these areas at risk, the closer to the structure the combustible fuels are, the greater the risk. So the more you can reduce combustible fuels in that area around your house, 5 foot, 10 foot, 30 foot, 100 foot, the safer you're going to be. So now how do we do this? So, well, let's take a look. There's a lot of things you can do and a lot of stuff that doesn't cost a lot of money, particularly when it comes to defensible space. It's a good idea to be systematic. I would recommend not starting outside the 100 feet, trying to thin your forest and working towards your house. I suggest you begin at the home ignition zone. Time is precious. We all don't have a lot of it. So time well spent, in my opinion, is focusing on your home ignition area first. Change your combustible mulch to non-combustible mulch. Put some hardscaping there. Get rid of dead, dry plants. Put well-irrigated plants in there if you're gonna have plants. When you put plants, try not to put them underneath windows or in front of vents, things like that. Try to use as much common sense as you can when you're thinking about that area. And then work from there out. If the only thing you do is clean up that 5 to 10 feet around your house, you've done a lot of good. In some places, you go up to Monterey and outside of Rio Neto, up in Rio Neto. Some of these places, Camp Meekers, some of these places have postage stamp size lots, and they don't have 100 feet. All they've got is about 10 to 20 feet. Then it's really important to make sure that home ignition zone is really clean and sparse when it comes to combustible materials. Get anything combustible out of the home ignition zone. So I was just mentioning that. This is my house, couple of plastic chairs. That's not a non-combustible skeleton. He's plastic. So yeah, if I got the red flag warning, I'd pull these in the house, get them off my porch. And of course I would pull in my red line firefighter flag. I have a Trex deck and I don't have anything stored underneath it. But yeah, if I get the red flag warning, news flash, that stuff's going in the house. Make sure you clean the roof and gutters often. Believe it or not, you can start out in a wind event with nice clean gutters. And when we get the PSP and we have the wind event, those rain gutters can fill up pretty quickly. So you gotta clean everything, you gotta clean it often, not like once a year. What I do is I'm a weirdo. I have a ladder on my roof almost always. And I'll go up there with the leaf. And I have a safety rope tied up to an anchor almost always. So, and I throw on a harness, climb up the ladder with my leaf blower, hook myself in on the line, and at 62 years old, I'm up there on the roof blowing out my rain gutters a few times a season. I'm not asking everyone to do that. You do what you can when you can. Look for all the little changes of elevation and changes of direction on your roof. If you got dormers, hips, valleys, not so much hips, but valleys, things like that, make sure those are cleaned out too. Because that stuff, once you get something starting to stack up in there, then more will stack up and more will stack up, and it seems to just grow longevity, kind of at a high rate. Okay. And as I mentioned earlier, the presentation will be available downstream give us a few days to get us out there. Obviously, the non-ignition zone or reduced ignition zone, store firewood and other combustible materials as far away as you can get it from the structure. That's my neighbor's yard, but they've moved it since then. It looks a lot better. That tree is my tree. It used to be rubbing against the house and the roof. Until a few years ago, I got up there. A friend of mine who knows how to trim trees came over, taught me how to trim trees, and helped me trim the trees around my house. So that's some of the work we did. Work out from the home ignition zone. So now that you've got your home ignition zone all nice and clean and tidy and as safe as you can possibly make it, next thing to do is start working out from there. Get that weed whacker out, cut down the grass, keep the grass short, and do this trimming and leaning and greening all the way out to at least 100 feet. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about longer distances for your defensible space, but the first milestone is at 100 feet, to really lean up and get lean and green. The idea is to create some space between the ground and the crown. Say that 3 times fast. As a rule of thumb, in the bottom left corner of the slide there, you see, the dimension X is the height of, in this case, a shrub, but that could be any combustible material. It can be a dog house. It can be a pump, house. It can be, a shrub, whatever. You want to have at least 3 times the height of whatever that is, trimmed up between the top of that and the lower portion of the crown of a tree. So for example, if that's a 2-foot tall doghouse, then from the roof of that doghouse to the understory of that tree, you want to have a 6-foot space between there. The fields between that area, they're called ladder fields, and I'm sure you can guess why they're called ladder fields. In case you can't, they're called ladder fields because the fire will use those fields to climb up into the crown of a tree. And the light flashy fields on the ground and in shrubs and grass aren't too bad in terms of fire management and even fire behavior of the fields when they're burning. However, when you get those light flashy fields igniting your heavier fields, what we call your 100-hour, I think is what they're called, or 1,000-hour fields. The fields that once the fire gets in there, they're going to burn hot and heavy and big and burn for a long time and spread a lot of embers. Once they get in there, then the fire is a lot harder to manage. So once again, use the ladder fields and shrubs rule of thumb as much as you can. If you don't have anything underneath, my recommendation is get those loppers out and trim them off as high as you safely can. That's what I try to do, and that's what I recommend. And then out from there, anything that's dry or dead that, isn't moist. Somebody asked me one time, what about a log that is, providing habitat? And that's an assessment you have to make. If you got a log, if it's providing habitat, my guess is it's at least a little bit moist. But if it's an old, dry, junky piece of wood, building material, log, tree trunk, whatever, if it's dry, if it looks like something that'd be perfect to throw in a campfire, get it out of there. Like right there, there's grass there, there's wood piled up there. That has got to go. The other concept is with your vegetation. Now remember, we're not asking people to just make a moonscape all over your property, and we're not asking you to get rid of every plant. Plants are good. Plants give us oxygen. Plants are pretty. Plants are good for our psyche. Plants are wonderful. The idea is to not cultivate and harbor icky plants like a juniper where you've peeled back the exterior of it and it's all dry inside. We don't want to be harbors of trees and plants that aren't well irrigated, stuff that can dry out in just a flash and then become flash fuel. And then also in terms of your landscaping, try to be sure your landscaping is in like clumps. So if you've got a clump, the smaller the clump, if that does turn into a fire, the smaller that fire is going to be. So the smaller the clump and the more distance between the next group or clump, the less chance of the fire getting huge. Think in terms of, ask yourself, if this group of vegetation, if this set of vegetation were to be fully involved in fire, how big would that fire be? And would it be big enough to catch that thing on fire that's over there? Ask yourself that as you're doing this work and planning or designing a new landscape. As much as possible, give yourself 10 feet between the tops of trees in this defensible space area where you have trees, or, clumps of trees, put distance between groups of trees and other groups of tree. And once again, remove dead trees and shrubs. If you've got a tree like my oak, I've got an oak tree in front of my house I'm still working on. It's got some, because I wasn't keeping it trimmed correctly, I ended up killing a bunch of branches in that tree. So I've got a lot of dead branches in my oak tree that I'm still working on excising and getting out of there. So earlier, throughout the scope of this conversation so far, presentation, I should say, it's not a conversation yet. Most of what I've been talking about is really related to flat sloping properties. Earlier, I alluded to the fact that when your slope changes, things change. You may have to extend your distances beyond that 100 feet. So here's a little diagram that shows that, for shrubs and trees, depending on slope, what you may think about doing as minimums. Now remember, this is minimums. I'll share a story with you. When I was fire marshal for Sonoma County, I was looking at a project that somebody was submitting for permits, pretty good sized project. And they were complaining about all the codes and regulations that they had to comply with. And I finally look at this guy and I go, here's the thing. You know what? Just keep in mind, these codes and regulations, those are the minimum standards. You can do better. This is a C grade or C minus, D plus standard. You can be an A student if you want to be. You can even do more than the minimum standard. The codes and regulations are minimum standards. Remember that. They're not the best. They're the minimum standard. So if you're meeting the minimum standard, what grade is that if you're in school? Is that a D minus or D plus, C minus? That's what we're talking about here. Passing grade. So anyway, I digress. So got a bit of slope, 21 to 40 percent slope. Then you want to increase these distances that we're looking at between clumps of trees or between shrubs and things. And then when you're talking about in excess of 40-degree slope, then you need to make these distances even greater. I've got another graphic I'll show you in a little bit here that talks about how big to make your defensible space depending on slope. Another key thing I don't want to fail to mention is make sure that along your driveway and your frontage roads, you do your defensible space, not just around your home. And the project that we're involved with this presentation with Transportation and Public Works, it's a project meant to, for the fuels reduction part of it, clear back vegetation on major circulatory roads in West County to provide for better evacuation and better access for firefighting. You as a homeowner can help with that by clearing the frontage of yours. If you live in an area where, the homes are right up against that street and you can do your part and give that 10 to 20 foot defensible space along that roadway edge by doing that on your own property, that helps. It's gonna, and if everybody does that, it'll help. It's kind of like reading a book, one page is not a big deal, but if you're reading a 300-page book, by the time you get through 300 pages, it's done. So one person doing this, it might not seem like it's a big deal, but if you get your whole neighborhood doing this, it's a big deal for everybody. So please, don't forget about cleaning along your roadways, your driveways, private roads, whatever. It's all gonna help. Defensible space belongs there too. And power lines, if you've got power lines attached to your service line, PG&E, to my understanding, doesn't do much with the line that goes from their infrastructure to your home. So your service drop, make sure that that's free of trees and anything that's gonna, be blowing against those wires. The service drop to your house should be insulated, but if you've got a tree branch rubbing up against that insulation over a period of years, it's gonna rub that insulation off. And if you do that in a couple of places on two different conductors and you get a high wind or a branch that pushes those conductors together, it's gonna spark and arc and drop burning slag onto the ground or into the tree, and potentially cause a fire. So don't forget about that. Very important. So here's the graphic I mentioned a couple slides ago. Once again, if your home's on a slope, increase these areas. I don't want to spend a lot of time here in the interest of time, but you know, that once again, the presentation will be made available. And also, just to let you know, a lot of the graphics for this came out of Fire Safe Sonoma's iconic, I'll call it, publication, Living with Fire in Sonoma County. It's available on our website. If you go to our website, go to information and documents, or resources and documents, go there and you'll see Living with Fire as a PDF. You can certainly take a look at it there. 2 clicks, should only be 2 clicks away. Click, once you get on the, click to the website. 2 clicks. You're on the website, click to the page for documents and resources, and click to the resource. Okay, so if you have a sloping lot, you know, beware that you probably need to go more than 100 feet overall. Okay, so that was the how. So let's talk about why. I've got about a few more minutes before we're going to get into Q&A. My target is 2:45 to get into the Q&A. So let's blast through this. Why should you even be worried about this? We talked about the area, high fire severity zone, you know, the lemonade, the orange juice, the tomato juice, whatever. But why, really, why should you be worried about this? Well, let's take a look at it. History repeats itself, right? So let's go back. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I will tell you what I'm showing you is available at Digital Mapping Solutions. The woman that owns that is Esther Mandeno. I know I never pronounced that well. Sorry, Esther. And she crafted a, I forget what it's called, like a story map of a history map of fires in Sonoma County since 1944, greater than, I think, 5,000 acres. So let's take a look at some of those real quick. But if you want to go see this in its entirety and spend more time here, which I recommend you all do, if you Google Digital Mapping Solutions, you'll get to our website and you'll get to this. It's a fantastic, fantastic visual representation of our fires. So let's take a look. So 1944, an unnamed fire in southwest of Lake Sonoma, off of Dry Creek Road, burned 7,600 acres. Okay, that's okay. Let me get to the next slide here. And then 1954, just 10 years later, it's kind of a bit of time in between, 10,000 acres. The fire was called the Charles Fire, burned northwest Cazadero, east of Fort Ross in Historic Park. Okay, you know, that's an area up in West County that had a fire, significant fire, 10,000 acres. And in 1959, 5 years after that, 5,370 acres, Kelly Fire, east of Gualala, still up there out in West County. 1961, 6,000 acres, 2 years after that last fire, Watson Gulch Fire, north of Monterey and northwest of Guerneville. Bet some of you folks live out there. And 3 years after that, 1964. Now this is a historic fire, the Hanley Fire. It burned a huge amount of area, Chalk Mountain, Devil's Kitchen, Red Hills, Palisades, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, so remember that number, 56,000 acres. And remember that area. Okay, same year, 10,000 acres, Nuns Canyon, Valley of the Moon, Bald Mountain, Mount Veeder. This is starting to sound familiar. 1 year later, 13,000 acres, it's called the PG&E number 10 fire, northwest Santa Rosa, adjacent to the Hanley Fire and near Knights Valley. That sound familiar? Same year, 7,200 acres, called the Magic Mountain Fire, north of Duncan Mills and east of Jenner. Okay, now we're talking West County. Same year, 8,445 acres, unnamed fire, Carneros Valley and into the Arrowhead Mountains, Sonoma area. 1978, 13 years after that. So we got like a 13-year break. We got a chance for some of this stuff to grow back and you know, nature to do what it does. Creighton Ridge, bet there's a lot of you attending this webinar right now or were around during the Creighton Ridge fire. For me, the Creighton Ridge fire, I was just right out of high school practically, and it was kind of an inspiration for me to become a firefighter. I became a volunteer firefighter in 1980. So 2 years after the Creighton Ridge fire, I joined the Roseland Fire Protection District as a volunteer firefighter. West of Cazadero, remember the area. 4 years later, 6,200 acres, not huge, Silverado, you know, North Sonoma County. It's a reburn of the Hanley area. 1988, 6 years after that. So we're getting some buffers between there. 11,000 acres, unnamed fire, Geysers Peak. Okay, and they're done that. 3 years after that, 6,000 acres, Geysers fire, northeast of Black Mountain. Okay. And then 2004, bit of a break, 13 years later, 12,000 acres up in the Geysers. I remember that fire. I went to that fire as a career firefighter with Santa Rosa. 2015, 2 years after that, Valley Fire. And we're all familiar with the Valley Fire. I'm very familiar with it because I live in Lake County in Hidden Valley, and I thought I lost my house. And then 2 years later, the Nuns Fire. Okay, now this is part of the Northern California firestorm. So this is one of several fires. 56,556 acres. Okay. Then same time, 36,810 acres Tubbs fire. And then same time, 17,000 acres of Pocket fire. All at once, you guys. And then 4 years later, 77,758 acres of Kincaid fire in Geyserville. So I like numbers, I like graphs, I like charts, I like statistics. I like to look for patterns and trends. So let's do that. So here you see the earlier fires. Okay, here's one, few years, here's one, 5 years between, 3 years, couple years, then we had the Watson Gulch fire. A little bit later, significant fire, there's the Hanley fire, guys. Okay, then there's the Nuns Canyon, little break, you know, relatively, you know, not huge by today's standard. Then you get over in today's world right here. Okay, so then we've got here Valley Fire, a couple years later right here, these three here. So if you think about it, these lines represent acreage. So when we compare the firestorms that we had, you know, in 17, I guess it was it 17? Gosh. With the Hanley fire, okay, think of these little rectangles on this graph as acreage. Well, the Hanley fire, it could easily fit in just one of these. So you add all these together in terms of total acreage, we kicked the Hanley fire's butt in terms of total acreage with their firestorms. And then we got a little break for a couple of years, and then we've got the Kincaid fire, very comparable to the Hanley fire, excuse me, very comparable to the Valley fire in overall acreage. So do you guys see kind of a trend here? Not much going on here. Maybe this here's an anomaly, not much going on, and all of a sudden we've got all this. Also, when you think of the trend here, look at the geography where these are happening. So if over here, we've got a repeat down here, which I think we do, then in some of these areas that haven't repeated like this yet, I think that's what our future holds. So I'm not an expert, but that's just my thought. Why should you be worried? I don't know. Looking at stuff like that, I get pretty worried. Here's another reason why you might be worried about this stuff, or concerned. Maybe concerned is a better word. The physics are difficult to change when you're talking about the wildland fire environment. Everything that is combustible needs fuel, heat, and oxygen to burn. You take one of those parts of that triangle away, and the fire will go out. In a typical structure fire, when we put water on the fire, it takes the heat out of that triangle and the fire goes out. If you look at the physics as applied to the wildland fire environment, we look at field weather and topography. And if you break one of the sides of that triangle, you will prevent or stop the fire. So the topography, well, that's the ground, that's the land, that's the terrain, that's the elevations. We're not gonna do much with that. And the weather, I don't know, we can't do much about the weather. Really, the only thing we can do anything about is the field. And that's why you should be worried. You can't change that other stuff. Nobody can, but we can change the field. And when I say change the field, we can change their state of subdivision, as the scientists call it, of the field, to make it less prone to fire, put the spaces between there. And in terms of your structure, you know, I'm not gonna talk about structural hardening, but reduce the ignitability of your structure. Those are things we can do. Think of the fuel. That's the only place we can do anything to, in my opinion, to significantly reduce the risk of wildland fire safety. Oh yeah, I just said that. We're limited to changing the combustibility of the fuel, the configuration of the fuel, and the amount of the fuel. Fuel's reduction, you know, thin the fuel. And as, you know, in terms of your structure, you know, reduce the combustibility. So why should you be worried? Because if you do nothing, the red will get you: radiant heat, embers, and direct flame. So like I mentioned earlier, this is most of this material, or at least the graphics, came out of our publication, Living with Fire in Sonoma County. So let's have some Q&A. I am looking at some Q&A, see what we got. And Stuart, if you can come online and maybe help me with the Q&A, do you see anything? Do you want to moderate the questions and just toss questions to me?
Yeah, I looked through the questions and there's a few there that Ellie had mentioned. So if you want to take a look at those.
Yeah, actually, I don't see, you know, it looks like Ellie has most of the questions. Let's see, Jim Masters, retirement, 50 feet homes. I don't know. How do the defensible space standards apply to houses that are close to Santa Rosa Creek? Well, it's all about reducing your risk as much as you can, Jim, in terms of, you know, doing what you can on your property. It's, you know, if you've got stuff in a creek nearby or things like that, then you're talking about repairing right of way, excuse me, areas that are a little challenging. And so I'm gonna actually, Ellie, if you don't mind, I want to turn on your audio, and I'm gonna introduce you, Ellie, by saying that I think your vegetation, fuels, landscaping expert. So I'm gonna bring you on board to ask your questions verbally and talk to the group, because I think whatever you have to say is gonna be beneficial. So Ellie, you're up.
Okay, am I still muted?
Nope, you're talking. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I've been working with Roberta and Carleone and Chief Will.
Sorry, Ellie, I just switched you to panelist so people can see. Do you want to turn on your mic, I think?
Okay, there I
we
am.
go. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've been working with Carleone and Roberta and Chief Williams, Fire Safe Sonoma and County, and the idea is to help people do the fire safe thing while also supporting biodiversity and wildlife habitat and reducing erosion control and taking care of riparian areas and so on. So my questions were kind of got to introduce those. And I don't have my questions in front of me right now.
One was you mentioned the horizontal and vertical spacing is not part of the code, it's a recommendation.
Right.
That is
Yeah.
correct, yeah.
And that's about a year ago. I became, my ears pricked up when I saw those vertical and horizontal spacing guidelines. And Carol Leone also gives these workshops, and we created some modified graphics so that people could see that you can actually have clumps of vegetation with those horizontal spacing in between them rather than just one shrub at a time. But as you get on steeper slopes, you start running into the problem of needing to have more spacing between vegetation because of the way fire moves up slopes. But then you also have issues with erosion control. So what we have concluded is that it's possible to have low growing vegetation or even herbaceous, grasses and well irrigated things in those areas between clumps of vegetation, just to hold the soil in place, because you don't want to be causing another problem while you're solving the first one. So we've been developing workshops that help landowners really visualize what that could look like. I've been working with UC Master Gardener for Sonoma County and the Habitat Corridor Project in Sonoma Ecology Center. And we are doing workshops that basically build on what Roberta has been presenting. So that's just a kind of an overview. I don't want to go into any more detail unless there's a specific question that somebody else wants to ask.
Yeah, and also I wanted to share with folks that you're working with Master Gardener and the university, and you're working on some education and outreach related to fire safe landscaping for landscape designers and architects and landscape installers, I don't know what you call them, as well as fire inspectors so that they can learn more. I will share with you all that when I was a firefighter and a fire inspector doing these wildland safety inspections, it was pretty much just trim stuff up. Ellie has kind of enlightened me to the fact that, there's more to it than just trimming up the vegetation. There's putting in the correct plants and the way you plant them and the spacing between them and everything else. It all matters. And I learned the hard way about how to trim my own oak tree. So I didn't kill it. I thought I was doing a good thing trimming it up, but what I was doing was killing some of the branches inside of it, making the problem worse. So there's a lot more to fire safe landscaping than just leaning it up and trimming it up. And that's really, where I think Ellie's expertise is. And I'm relying on her a lot for that expertise.
Yeah, we're working together to do workshops. And the main thing is plant selection, but the more important than plant selection is maintenance. So basically, there are a few plants that you don't want to have near your house or on your property, and that's typically juniper and cypress. But if you plant and concentrate on lower plants closer to the house, and then the taller plants further away, and then you just keep them clear of dead and dying wood, and you keep them well hydrated. And we like to emphasize native plants because they can be well hydrated more easily with less water. And if you keep the soil healthy and the plant healthy, and it's in the, it's the right plant in the right place, then you don't have to work as hard. And I think that's one, and we're all about wildlife and biodiversity at the same time as you protect your house. So we have a website that's in development called Resilient Landscape. It's a Sonoma Resilient Landscapes.com, and I can put it in the chat box. It's not fully developed, but it's on its way, and it's just right now kind of a holding place so people know where to go to get information.
Yeah, if you would share that in the Q&A, that'd be great. I don't know that you have chat available.
Oh, there's no chat. Oh, it's a webinar. That's right.
But anyway, yeah, thank you, Ellie. I see a handful of questions that I think really lean towards code enforcement. And I do want to share with you guys that on July 8th, I'm doing a panel discussion. It won't be a presentation like that. It'll be pretty candid interview, live panel discussion between me, Chief Ben Nichols of CAL FIRE, and the fire warden, James Williams from Permit Sonoma's Fire Prevention Division. I still call him the County Fire Marshal. The title's actually changed a while back. But regardless, I'm gonna have those folks talking about the codes and regulations that apply in the wild WUI environment. And I think the timing of this is gonna be good because the county Board of Supervisors just approved a new ordinance for combustible vegetation compliance. So we want to talk a little bit about that with Chief Williams in that discussion. That's going to be July 8th. I forget what time I have it slotted for. But if you're on our subscription list for Fire Safe Sonoma, you'll get the notice on that and the opportunity to register for that webinar or panel discussion. So let's see, we've got 1 minute left. Yeah, go ahead, Stuart. What do you got in there?
Are we ending at 3 sharp?
Yeah, well, I'd like to, if we've got a lot of unanswered questions, I want to answer any unanswered questions as best we can.
I'm recommending we try to whip through some of these questions. I want to say,
I haven't had a chance to really look at them, so if you can kind of throw them at me.
yeah, just real quick about Jim Masters' question. I think he wrote up a really well thought out question, and we don't have a lot of time right now, but I wanted to say, Jim, that you're bringing up a really important point, and a number of people have the same concerns that you have. The protection of the riparian corridor is a big issue with that question, but I would suggest what you can do for yourself and your home is the primary issue that you can take care of. Additionally, you can also call the city and ask them to do an assessment, based on your concerns. So.
Yeah, and then with Fire Safe Sonoma, we're hoping to downstream a little bit, create a countywide project to offer wildland fire home assessment at a, as low a cost as we can get it to you guys, or if we can get grant funding for free, or if we can find volunteers that are willing, that are trained and qualified to do them for free. We want to be able to put those folks out there to do those at no cost.
Right.
So that's something we're exploring with the board at Fire Safe Sonoma right now. So we're hoping to grow that project.
Also, Roberta, 2 more questions related to basically how do you communicate with your neighbors about what's going on their properties?
I'm going to let you answer that, Stuart, because I think you've talked to me about that, and I think your philosophy on that is really good. Do you want to respond to that?
Well, without knowing the particulars, I think that first of all, it's a common concern that people have, and there's a number of different approaches that you can take based on your understanding of what's going on, your relationship with that neighbor. But I think being non-confrontational is obviously a really good idea. Perhaps providing them with some objective information from Fire Safe Sonoma, for example, giving them a ready, set, go pamphlet or preparing for a wildfire, that kind of thing. If they're interested in talking to you more about it, go ahead and talk to them. But if they really would, if you feel like they would benefit from talking to more of an official person or someone who's an expert, that might provide some additional support for you.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, Stuart has the skill set for that kind of stuff, I think, technically and officially. But I think it's really about, being as diplomatic as you can. What else is out there, Stuart? Anything else unanswered for me to? I think we answered Cynthia's question. I think are we caught up, Stuart?
Well, there's one at the end there. It says living in an area where trees from City of Sebastopol property that overhang my property. If it's within 100-foot zone, does the city need to remove anything overhanging?
The word need is different than the word required. I would look at Sebastopol city ordinance to see if it has any regulation with regard to fuels reduction along roadways. And if it does, then I would share that with the city tactfully and diplomatically and say, hey, just so you know, you guys are in violation of your own rules. Can you do something about that? I know when I was the fire marshal for Sonoma County, I would get complaints from the general public about roads, and there were county roads on county easements with regard to fuels reduction in wildland fire safety. And I would forward those to TPW and the real estate division of the county. And it's really hard to get the bureaucracy to do what they're supposed to do sometimes. But if it were me, Daniel, I would try that.
Roberta, do you still have me unmuted? This is
Yeah.
Ellie.
Yes.
I remember there was another question I had put in there. I no longer have access to the earlier questions, but I had a point in there about what does the term clearing mean for instance, when you refer to clearing along the roadways. And I think from what I understand, clearing doesn't mean cutting everything down. It means doing the same thing that you would do in the 0 to 30. In other words, keeping the grass cut to 4 inches, limbing up the trees to at least 3 times the height of anything underneath. So I think to me, the word clearing means cut everything down. But could you clarify that?
Yeah, see, there you go again, teaching me. I love it. That's just a term that, you grow up being a firefighter. It's like, oh, you clear this out. But you're right. It's not a very positive sounding term. And you're exactly right. It means making that area along the edge of the road, do the same things you would if that road was a building. A road is a structure. And so look at it that way. It doesn't mean moonscape along it, but if you've got a creek along that road with the riparian way right there, it's going to be probably moist and well irrigated anyway. So you may not need to clear it all out. But I think we need to find a better term to use to describe what we're talking about. And Ellie, if you can help me there, I'm all for that.
All right. We do have to talk about the videos we're going to write a grant for. So that can be part of the conversation. That's great.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. What else is in the hopper, Stuart? Anything?
There's just maybe a quick answer on this question. It says, is it advisable on red flag days to wet down your landscape?
If it were me, I would, and I do, unless you're in the middle of a power shutoff, a PSPS. And I'll share an experience with you I had, and I know we're over time here and I talk a lot, but I'll try to be brief. So during one of the power outages last year during Kincaid, I was trying to keep my yard irrigated, and just worried like crazy that the wind was going to change and the fire was going to come toward me where I live on the north side of the mountain instead of going towards Windsor. So every night I'm actually wetting down my ignition area, 5 to 10 foot ignition area around my home with soapy water. I'll get a garden sprayer that connects to the hose, and I'll put Joy soap in it, and I'll wet down the area, 4 or 5 feet around my house. What the soapy water does, it acts like sort of like a fire retardant with the water. It creates more of a surfactant, acts more like a surfactant. So the water gets into any combustible material around there and doesn't just lay on top of it. That's what I do. Now, and I was also keeping my lawn very well irrigated. And about halfway through one of those PSPS, it occurred to me that, okay, I'm dumb, because the water systems in our areas are typically what are called combination systems. So they work by pumping water up to a storage tank or reservoir where it's stored while we have power. And then for the most part, gravity delivers the water to the end user. So when power's out, you'll still have that water available in those tanks. However, if you get idiots like me trying to keep their lawn watered, etc., using that water along with your normal daily use, there can be a point in time during that power shutoff period where you go below the safe area for fire, the safe level of water for fire protection. So, short answer is if you've got power, probably not a bad idea. If you don't have power, I wouldn't do it. What else we got, Stuart?
Let's see here. Jim Masters wrote back and he said, we did call the city. They sent us to county water. They came and looked. They like dead trees and brush to shelter birds and provide shade to fish. They will only remove non-native plants as part of creek restoration. It appears to me that land controlled by county water is exempt from defensible space rules.
Can I speak to that,
Yes, please.
Roberta? The riparian habitat is one that has come up a lot in the recent year, just because it's not just the county, but the state Fish and Wildlife, and in fact, the Army Corps of Engineers. There's so many agencies. I've spent my career doing riparian habitat restoration. And one of the things that you have to be aware of is keeping vegetation on stream banks is very important. Otherwise, the banks will become unstable and you may lose your house because the bank, it starts eroding. So it's a balance. It's a little bit like walking a tightrope. I live on Sonoma Creek. My house is about 15 feet from the top of the bank. And the main thing to do is to get the vertical spacing between any vegetation on the bank that you do want to keep, and you want to keep it hydrated, and then any trees that are up high, and maybe get a little bit of the horizontal spacing. But you can do that by pruning without having to remove too much, unless it's an invasive species. So the county is correct in doing that. Landowners there are legal requirements to maintain the riparian habitat. So it gets a little trickier. I think Carol Leone spoke to that, and she's doing a series of community meetings. She's with the county, and the inspectors are trained to go and look at that and be able to speak to how to walk that fine line. There are other organizations as well. The Sonoma Ecology Center works in the Sonoma Valley in particular, and the resource conservation districts, the Sonoma and the Goldridge, can also help a lot with that question of riparian habitat.
Yeah, and I think there's another question that I would like you to, if you don't mind, Ellie, speak to. Joe Lieber is writing, it's best to keep plants hydrated by irrigation to the roots as opposed to overhead irrigation that will evaporate very quickly. Well, I'm not sure it's a question or if it's a statement, but
it's so interesting because the Native Plant Society has actually been speaking up a little bit about overhead irrigation as being not a terrible thing if you just do like a half an inch every 10 days as a sprinkler, almost like fog drip, and it can help hydrating. But it's actually really true, especially around the base of oak trees. You definitely don't want to do any overhead irrigation because then you'll have a fungus that will kill the tree outright, and definitely don't want that. So drip irrigation is, in most cases, a good solution to keep plants hydrated.
All right. Anything else in the hopper, Stuart, that is outstanding, or we're running a little over?
Let's see. I think a quick one too. Is there vegetation locally that are illegal, like the very flammable eucalyptus?
Not that I'm aware of. Are you aware of any, Ellie, that are technically illegal?
Wait, what was the question?
Go ahead.
Is there a vegetation that's illegal to have because they're too flammable?
You know, I'm pretty sure that there's nothing illegal. From what I've heard, and I really pay attention to this because being a plant person, that it's okay to have eucalyptus, but it's got all that stuff that the bark shreds and hangs and drips all over the place, and it creates its own fuel ladder. So if you have eucalyptus or your neighbor has it, then you might want to team up with them to get rid of all of the stuff that's growing or that's falling down around it. And even juniper, I have a good friend who went in and pruned, just dug deep inside of her big, like 30 or 40-year-old juniper, and pruned and trimmed and created a beautiful, almost lace work. So, you can theoretically have just about anything as long as it's really well, like bonsai. It's really intensely maintained and well hydrated.
Yeah. It looks like we've exhausted all the questions. Do you see anything outstanding, Stuart?
Not at this point.
Okay, so I think that's it. So 22 people hanging in there. Thank you guys for hanging in there. And, I can't thank you enough for being here and sitting through this presentation. I so appreciate it. And I hope you find the material worthwhile. I have set it up so you should receive a short survey after this presentation once you log out. If you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes to fill that out, it's going to help me/us as we move forward creating this kind of content. We want to create content that's relevant for you all and stuff that you're going to enjoy getting and actually learn from. We want it to be something of value for you. So your feedback is really key for us moving forward. So once again, thank you all. Ellie, thank you so much for jumping in there. I would love to do a program with you to talk about, just the vegetation part of it. You guys did a webinar a while ago. Do you want to share that? I think it's available for people.
Yeah, we need to post it. We can post it to the website. It's SonomaResilientLandscapes.com. Just one word, SonomaResilientLandscapes.com. We put it in the Q&A, so if people have access to that, they can see it, and we can just post it to that, and then people can get a hold of it that way.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you again, everybody, for hanging in there. The 16 minutes we went over. And I really appreciate you taking the time this hot afternoon to hang out with us and learn some stuff. All right. We'll see you guys. I'm going to sign off.